In 1943, as the Second World War raged across Europe and the Pacific, the United States Navy was pushing its scientists to explore technologies that could give them an overwhelming advantage against German U-boats and Japanese fleets. Among these projects was one that would later be remembered not as a triumph of science, but as a legend shrouded in secrecy and fear. The story is centered on a destroyer escort called the USS Eldridge. According to accounts, this vessel was chosen for a classified experiment at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The goal, allegedly, was not just to protect it from enemy radar, but to render the ship completely invisible. Witnesses would later claim they saw the tension unimaginable. The Navy had installed powerful electromagnetic coils on the Eldridge. The idea was to bend light and radar waves around the ship, creating a cloaking field. When the system was activated, sailors on board reported a strange, humming vibration, and then a dense greenish fog began to rise around the vessel. The ship seemed to shimmer, fade, and then, in the most astonishing claim, disappear entirely. For minutes, there was nothing left where a warship had stood. Some claimed that the Eldridge did not simply vanish, but reappeared hundreds of kilometers away in Norfolk, Virginia, only to return almost instantly back to Philadelphia. To those watching, it seemed as though the destroyer had slipped out of our Virginia world and returned again. Witnesses who saw the fog lifting swore the ship had been gone, not seconds, but long enough to terrify everyone on the docks. If the ship truly vanished and traveled through space in an instant, the next question is, what happened to the men on board? Here, the story turns from science fiction to horror. When the Eldridge supposedly reappeared, some sailors were found deranged, screaming incoherently, or frozen in shock. Their mental state was shattered, beyond repair. Others were said to have suffered even worse fates. According to the legend, some crewmen were fused into the metal bulkheads of the ship, as if their bodies had partially merged with solid steel. Arms, legs, even torsos stuck halfway through the structure, their flesh and bones inseparable from the iron hull. Survivors described the screams of men trapped alive inside the walls, begging for help, while others were already dead, still fused into the steel as grotesque statues of suffering. Some sailors were reported missing entirely, never found after the incident, adding to suspicions that they had been displaced into another dimension. Witnesses later suggested that the experiment was more than a cloaking test, that it had been an attempt at teleportation or even time travel. The idea was that the Navy might harness Einstein's still incomplete unified field theory to manipulate gravity and electromagnetic forces, tearing a hole in the very fabric of space, time, and pushing a ship through it. Whether or not the Navy truly attempted this, the rumors spread like wildfire. The Philadelphia experiment had become more than a story about science. It was a nightmare about what happens when humans play with forces beyond their understanding. Official denials came quickly. The Navy insisted that no such test had ever been performed. They claimed that the Eldridge was not even in Philadelphia at the time. Yet, as is often the case with conspiracies, the denial only fueled belief. To many, the fact that records were so quick to dismiss the possibility suggested a deeper cover-up. The sailors who spoke of the event were silenced or discredited. Some insisted for the rest of their lives that they had seen the impossible. Others claimed it was nothing but wartime rumor. The result was a mystery that still divides historians, believers, and skeptics to this day. At its heart, the story of the Eldridge remains unforgettable. A warship that allegedly vanished into thin air and returned, leaving behind whispers of madness, mutilation, and secrets hidden deep within military archives. Was it a failed cloaking test, a teleportation experiment, or nothing more than the fevered imagination of sailors under stress? That is the question that keeps the Philadelphia experiment alive. The legend of the Philadelphia experiment did not spread because of official reports or Navy announcements. It survived because of the words of witnesses and whistleblowers, men who claimed to have seen it with their own eyes or heard the truth from those directly involved. The most important of these was a man named Carl Allen, also known as Carlos Allende. In the mid-1950s, Allende wrote a series of letters to a researcher named Morris Jessup, who had been studying UFOs and fringe physics. In these letters, Allende claimed that he had been on a nearby merchant ship in the Philadelphia harbor on the day of the alleged experiment. According to his story, he personally watched the USS Eldridge fade into a fell's green fog and vanish before reappearing in a flash of blinding light. He even described the panic among the sailors who had been on board, detailing accounts of men suffering severe injuries or losing their minds from the effects of whatever force had engulfed the vessel. Allende's letters were filled with references to Einstein's unified field theory, suggesting that the Navy had weaponized these scientific principles to bend space and time. His claims were specific and shocking, and they quickly captured the imagination of Jessup, who saw in them a potential key to mysteries about UFO propulsion and advanced physics. But Allende was not the only one. There were scattered testimonies from supposed dock workers, sailors, and locals in Philadelphia who insisted that something unusual had happened. Some claimed to see the ship vanish. Others described strange electrical storms that erupted suddenly over the harbor on that day. Still, others told of sailors who wandered into bars after the incident, dazed, confused, or even disappearing into thin air before the eyes of horrified patrons. These tales, however, always came secondhand, whispered from one person to another, never written down. In official records, the Navy kept meticulous logs of its ships and their movements, but when skeptics pointed out that the Eldridge was recorded in Norfolk, not Philadelphia, the believers countered that the logs had been falsified as part of a cover-up. The most disturbing witness accounts came from alleged crew members of the scattered Eldridge itself. While the Navy denied any of its sailors had spoken publicly, there were rumors of men who years later recounted their trauma. Some said they woke up after the experiment unable to remember how they got off the ship. Others described blackouts lasting days or even weeks. One recurring theme was the story of sailors who slipped in and out of visibility as if phasing in and out of reality. These men were supposedly nicknamed the Invisibles and had to be closely watched, lest they simply vanish permanently into whatever dimension the experiment had opened. One account described how two sailors got into a fight in a bar after the experiment, and in the middle of the scuffle, one of them blinked out of existence, never to return. Another was said to have been locked up in a padded cell because he could not control when he faded in or out of the physical world. Whether these accounts were genuine memories, hallucinations, or stories that grew with each retelling is impossible to know. Yet, they became the backbone of the Philadelphia experiment myth, lending it human faces and voices that turned the tale from a technical rumor into a story of tragedy and horror. The whistleblower element reached its peak when Jessup himself, after years of struggling with the implications of Allende's letters, was found dead in his car in 1959 from carbon monoxide poisoning. His death was ruled a suicide, but conspiracy theorists immediately suggested that he had been silenced for knowing too much. Jessup's death only deepened the aura of mystery. For believers, it was proof that there was something to hide. For skeptics, it was a sad but unrelated tragedy. Either way, the Philadelphia experiment had crossed from a sailor's story into a conspiracy that involved scientists, researchers, and possibly the government itself. At the center stood these witnesses and whistleblowers, painting a picture of a reality too strange to ignore. They forced people to ask, could the military endobby one? Its desperation during World War II have gone further than we ever imagined. The Philadelphia experiment has always stood on a thin line between science and science fiction. On one side are those who argue that the Navy was experimenting with real principles of electromagnetism and unified field theory. On the other side are those who dismiss it as impossible folklore. Yet to understand why the story has endured, we must look at the science behind it and the theories that attempt to explain how such an event could have taken place. The first key concept, often mentioned, is Einstein's unified field theory, a set of ideas he worked on but never completed. The goal of the theory was to merge the laws of electromagnetism with gravity into a single framework. If mastered, it could, in theory, allow control over space and time, bending them with enough energy. Proponents of the Philadelphia experiment claim the Navy harnessed this idea using giant electromagnetic coils mounted on the USS Eldridge to create a field so strong that it bent light around the ship, rendering it invisible, not just to radar, but to the human eye. In essence, they argue, the Navy created a kind of prototype cloaking device decades before modern stealth technology. Another layer to this theory suggests that in pushing the electromagnetic field to extreme levels, the Navy inadvertently tapped into time and space itself, causing the ship not just to vanish from sight, but to phase out of our reality entirely. This is where the stories of teleportation emerge. The claim is that the Eldridge disappeared from Philadelphia and was seen moments later in Norfolk, hundreds of miles away, before returning again to its original position. For believers, this was the accidental discovery of teleportation, the holy grail of physics, something that even today remains firmly in the realm of theoretical speculation. The mechanics of such an event are said to involve bending space-time, like folding a sheet of paper. If you place two tin braid points on that sheet, far apart from each other, normally it takes time to travel between them. But if you fold the paper so the points touch, the journey becomes instantaneous. The Philadelphia experiment, according to its myth, may have achieved such a fold, albeit in an uncontrolled and catastrophic way. Critics, of course, argue that this is pure fantasy. The energy required to bend space-time even slightly is far beyond what could be generated in the 1940s, let alone by a destroyer escort ship. The amount of power would rival that of stars. Not a few. Electromagnetic coils, powered by naval generators. Furthermore, no evidence of such technology has ever been found in the ship's design or in declassified documents. Skeptics point out that invisibility cloaking as a scientific pursuit has only made small progress in recent decades, using metamaterials and special optics, but nothing close to the scale of hiding an entire warship. And yet there are subtler theories that try to bridge the gap. Some suggest the Navy may have been experimenting with ways to scramble magnetic fields to make ships less visible to radar, which was still relatively new at the time. This process, called degaussing, was real and widely used to protect ships from magnetic mines. The leap from radar invisibility to full optical invisibility may have been a misunderstanding or exaggeration by those who saw unusual equipment installed on the Eldridge. In this version of the story, sailors who noticed strange electromagnetic equipment buzzing and glowing might have connected the dots themselves, creating tales that spiraled out of control. Others lean on the idea of mass hypnosis, disorientation, or even chemical testing on the crew, arguing that the bizarre memories of vanishing ships and phasing sailors could have been hallucinations triggered by experiments in psychological warfare. During World War II, the military explored countless unconventional ideas, from truth serums to mind control. It is not inconceivable that sailors may have been subjected to something unusual, leaving them with distorted memories. The most fringe theories push the limits further. Some propose that aliens provided the technology as part of an early exchange with the U.S. military. Others suggest that the experiment tore open a dimensional rift, exposing our world to parallel universes where physics operates differently. These ideas may sound wild, but they persist because they explain the strangeness that ordinary science cannot. Whether the Philadelphia experiment was advanced, physics gone wrong, misunderstood naval test, or pure invention, the science and theories behind it have fueled imagination for decades. They keep the story alive because, at its core, it challenges us with the ultimate question: could humans have already touched the edges of powers far beyond our current understanding? If the Philadelphia experiment really happened, then why is there so little official evidence? Why no records, no photographs, no crew logs that confirm the extraordinary claims? Believers point to one answer: a deliberate cover-up by the United States Navy. According to this view, the experiment was so catastrophic and so far beyond what the public could handle that it had to be buried, erased from history, and denied at every turn. Supporters of this theory argue that the Navy had both motive and opportunity to suppress the truth. During World War II, the stakes were existential. The Allies were desperate to find an edge against German U-boats that were sinking convoys in the Atlantic. The idea of making a ship invisible would have been an irresistible military prize. But when the experiment allegedly went wrong, resulting in deaths, insanity, and perhaps even men trapped inside the very walls of the Eldridge, the Navy realized they had unleashed something uncontrollable. The easiest solution was to deny it ever took place. According to conspiracy researchers, this denial went beyond silence. It involved falsifying logs, relocating the ship's service records, and intimidating witnesses who tried to speak out. Some sailors who allegedly survived the experiment were said to have been discharged quietly or reassigned under strict orders, never to discuss what they had seen. Others were rumored to have disappeared altogether, either institutionalized or worse, to prevent their testimony from surfacing. Skeptics argue that this sounds like the stuff of spy novels, but believers counter with chilling details. For instance, Morris Jessup, who received Carlos Allende's letters and investigated the claims, was said to have been visited by strange men in black suits who pressured him to stop asking questions. Then in 1959, Jessup was found dead in his car from carbon monoxide poisoning. His death was ruled a suicide, but many saw it as a warning to anyone who dug too deep. The Jessup incident became a central piece of the conspiracy puzzle, fueling suspicions that the government silences those who get too close to the truth. The alleged cover-up extended into the manipulation of information itself. In the late 1950s, mysterious annotated copy of Jessup's book, The Case for the UFO, appeared circulating among military circles. This edition, known as the Varro edition, contained detailed notes in the margins written by unknown hands that seemed to confirm Allende's claims about the Philadelphia experiment. Some claim the notes were written by insiders with first-hand knowledge of classified technology. The very existence of the Varro edition suggested that at least some branches of the insiders' military were paying serious attention to the story, even if they denied it publicly. Beyond silencing individuals, the conspiracy narrative argues that the Navy may have deliberately seeded disinformation to muddy the waters. By mixing truth with wild exaggeration, they could ensure that any serious claims would be dismissed as fantasy. Stories of sailors melting into steel or vanishing into thin air might have been spread precisely because they sounded too incredible to believe, thereby protecting the kernel of truth that lay underneath. At the same time, critics of the cover-up theory point out that government secrecy during World War II was extreme but not flawless. Projects like the Manhattan Project employed hundreds of thousands of people and still leaked in small ways. Could an experiment as dramatic as teleporting a warship really be hidden without a trace? For believers, the answer is yes, because the number of actual witnesses was small and dead. The consequences of exposure were too great to risk. They argue that the Eldridge was a small destroyer escort, not a massive aircraft carrier, and its crew could be controlled with threats and reassignments. They also note that wartime censorship was nearly total. The press did not report on anything the Navy did not want public. Ultimately, the cover-up narrative thrives because it fits into a larger pattern of distrust in government and military institutions. If they lied about weapons programs, nuclear testing, and psychological experiments, as history has shown why, not about something as shocking as teleportation or invisibility, the Philadelphia experiment becomes not just a single event, but a symbol of hidden knowledge, a reminder that what we are told is only part of the story, whether true or not. The belief in a cover-up has made the myth stronger, for every denial seems only to deepen the suspicion that something extraordinary was buried beneath layers of secrecy. Even if the Philadelphia experiment never truly happened, its legacy has been impossible to erase. The story has lived on for decades, evolving from a fringe conspiracy into one of the most enduring legends of modern folklore. It has inspired books, movies, documentaries, and endless debates. Each generation finds something new to fear or to hope for in its mysterious details, and that is why the myth refuses to die. In the 1980s, the experiment made its way into mainstream culture with the release of the film The Philadelphia Experiment, which dramatized the alleged events. In the movie, the ship vanishes from the harbor, only to reappear decades later, carrying crew members who had not aged a day. The film did not claim to be factual, but it captured the public imagination and gave new life to the legend. Around the same time, countless books and television specials began to explore the possibility of secret government experiments in time, travel, teleportation, and other exotic technologies. The idea of bending space and time was no longer just science fiction. It was presented as something that might already have been tested in secret labs or hidden naval yards. This blending of fiction and speculation blurred the line between entertainment and investigation, making the Philadelphia Experiment both a story and a cultural touchstone. For UFO researchers and conspiracy theorists, the tale became evidence of a broader hidden history. They linked it to the alleged treaties with extraterrestrials, the construction of underground bases like Dulce, and even the Montauk Project, which supposedly expanded on the Philadelphia Experiment by diving deeper into mind control and time manipulation. These connections created an entire mythology of hidden science, secret pacts, and government betrayals, where the Eldridge was just the first chapter. Skeptics naturally argue that the entire phenomenon is built on hoaxes, misremembered events, and the fertile imagination of those who thrive on mystery. Even skeptics admit that the persistence of the story says something important about human psychology. We are drawn to mysteries that defy easy explanation, especially when they involve institutions of power. People know governments keep secrets. The Philadelphia Experiment becomes a vessel into which those suspicions are poured and magnified. It is less about a single ship and more about a worldview shaped by secrecy, distrust, and the longing to believe that more is possible than what we are told. The legacy of the experiment also touches on science itself. While mainstream physicists reject the teleportation of ships as fantasy, the story has fueled public interest in advanced concepts like quantum entanglement, wormholes, and unified field theory. Popular culture and fringe science have fed into each other with the myth, inspiring real curiosity about whether the universe allows shortcuts through space and time, even if the Eldridge never vanished. It sparked questions that remain at the frontiers of physics and cosmology. Today, the Philadelphia Experiment thrives online with countless videos, forums, and podcasts dissecting every angle. Some insist it is a metaphor for unchecked military ambition. Others argue it is literal truth, suppressed by decades of cover-ups. Still others see it as a modern myth, a story that fulfills the same role as ancient legends of gods and monsters, reminding us that the world is stranger and darker than we dare admit. What is undeniable is its cultural staying power. Long after the last sailor from the Eldridge has passed away, the experiment remains a living mystery. In books, it sits alongside tales of Roswell and Area 50. 1. In films, it serves as shorthand for forbidden technology. In conversations, it resurfaces whenever people ask themselves what governments are capable of hiding. If it was a hoax, it was one of the most successful hoaxes of the 20th century. If it was real, then we live in a world far stranger than we realize. Either way, the Philadelphia Experiment continues to haunt our collective imagination, daring us to look beyond the official story and to wonder what might be lurking in the shadows of history.